Okay, so we start essentially with this. Well, it could be. Let's say this is like our external data, or like, yeah, I'll call this like external data. I don't know if that's a great name. Okay. Another way of putting this is like, uh, like extract and load. Okay, so this is kind of the task that we need to worry about, right, is to extract and load. And we can get that data from a variety of sources, right? Like this is data that we want to analyze, right? And ultimately move into an analytics database. So like one source is like our OLTP, right? In other words, our transactional database, like Postgres. Another source could be like any data that we're trying to scrape, so like HTML, right, that we're scraping. Another source could be, APIs, obviously. I'll just write it. APIs. And then finally, like, there are like SaaS tools, like HubSpot. Like HubSpot is kind of like Salesforce, right? If you're keeping track of like your clients, or maybe you're keeping track of like certain marketing data, like that could be like Mixpanel, right? These are different SaaS tools. By SaaS tools, it's like these are like what like a typical company is paying for. Less times for marketing, but it could be other tools as well. It could be like workflow management. Um, the point is like somehow we need to. The goal, right, is to take this data, move it eventually to an analytical database, right, like Snowflake, and we want to get some insights out of it. So it could be Snowflake, it could be Redshift, right? And then eventually what we want to do is produce either reports in the form of like, this could be like Excel sheets, CSV files. We could literally hook some of these tables up to dashboards, right? So it could be, nice, pretty dashboards. I have like a chart on it or whatever. That's a dashboard. And what else? It could be data for like data scientists, right? Like feature engine, what we call like features, or like a feature store. But this is data that then again it's probably more like either CSV or tables, right? So that data scientists can then query this data. All right. So maybe this goes for like business analysts, right? And maybe this is for like the marketing team. So you can think that like here's these various stakeholders that need data, for different reasons in different forms, right? Like the marketing team maybe doesn't want the raw data, but they do want to look at a dashboard. The business analyst, they actually want to dig in a little bit, but they don't know how to use SQL, or they don't want to deal with, our whole database. So maybe they just, use a CSV file and then work with pandas or something. And the data science team, right? Like maybe they want to work with CSV, maybe they want to work with like some underlying tables, right? It can be different forms for different stakeholders. But we're starting off, we have like kind of these issues of one, like, data produced in different forms, right, for these stakeholders, and like kind of a mess, right, of data from various sources. So what we've used in order, what we want to do ultimately is move that data into Snowflake. And we've seen different ways that we can do that. So one way, kind of like there's these two tools, I think so far that we've seen, what are the main ones? One is Airflow. Let's write this. So one is Airflow, right? And the other one that we've seen has been Fivetran. Okay. So Fivetran is called, like, specifically it's called an EL tool, right, for like extract and load. And the idea with Fivetran is that this essentially automates your extract and loading for you, and it connects directly into something like HubSpot, Sales, these kind of third-party tools. It will also connect directly into your OLTP, right? And we'll just can migrate it, can take this data and just move it over to Snowflake for you, right? and we can set up a schedule so that this does it every day or every week or whatever, right? It works well. It costs money, but otherwise, if you can use it, it's a good tool, right? Because it essentially does the engineering for you. The issue, of course, is like sometimes like we don't have those API. Like Fivetran just does not know about every API in the universe and has not like created tables for all of them, right? So when Fivetran isn't available with like some APIs, like we saw this with like the COVID data, right? Or if like you're scraping, there just literally isn't an API. Well, that's when it's a good case to use Airflow, right? Because Airflow is more like custom, right? Custom Python, SQL, right? You have to do everything yourself, essentially, right? We have to hit the API, like, potentially transform the data, whatever. But if we can use programming to get the data, then we can connect it to Airflow. And again, Airflow will also schedule for us, and it will connect. We can take the data, ultimately move it into Snowflake, or if we want, move it into S3. So let's talk about S3, right? This is referred to oftentimes as like staging. And like, why does this even exist? So one, I do think this is starting to go away a little bit, like the staging step. So, because ultimately what we want to do is move the data into Snowflake or Redshift or whatever, where we can just query it. The issue that can come up is sometimes, if we're working with APIs, where the data can be unstructured, meaning instead of just like a simple list of dictionaries, maybe it's like, we have, a movie, let's say it's like Jurassic Park is the title, and then we also have the actors, and now all of a sudden this is nested, right? And now that, for a lot of databases, this can be tricky then to query unstructured data. All right, so this is one reason, is just like we kind of have some JSON that doesn't exactly fit into a table. It turns out Snowflake does handle JSON data, but other databases do not. Another reason could be like, well, if it's HTML, right? Like Snowflake does not know how to query or really store at least to my knowledge, HTML data. But we can just like basically have a file store like S3 and store our HTML. And why do we want this stuff? Well, let's say we eventually pull out this, what we need from here, from the HTML, but then a year later we find out, oh, I would actually, the data scientists come to us and are like, well, really, you forgot about like pulling this information. Is there any way we can get that? And if you did not store the HTML, the answer is no, right? But if you did, then we can just go through it, write some sort of program to, iterate through the files and then pull out that data. All right, so this is a good reason for having this staging or having this like S3 storage, is just for unstructured data. All right. So far, what have we talked about? We said like, we have this data that comes from a variety of sources, right? We need eventually to move it into our analytical database so that then we can produce different outputs for different teams. We can oftentimes you call this like reports, which could be in the form of like Excel, or it could literally just be a dashboard. And we talked about these two different tools, right? Like Airflow is more custom jobs, and then Fivetran is off the shelf, right? And the reason to use Airflow is it's free, or there's the cost of hosting it, but this actually costs some money. The real reason, like the better reason, I think, is more that there's just sometimes that you cannot use Fivetran, right, or an alternative, because they just do not know about the API. They have not written a connector that can pull the data from the API and then load it into your database. All right, why do I say like kind of ignore the cost of Fivetran? Because generally engineering time is more expensive than something even like Fivetran that's just pretty, can be pricey. Generally engineering time that you would take to like do the work yourself it's not worth it. All right, if you think of like an engineer bills out like with overhead like $100 an hour, like it quickly is just not worth it, and then like the cost of maintaining that code can get quite expensive as well. All right, so normally if you can throw like somebody else, like if somebody else has a solution to a problem, it's not exorbitant, normally that's what you'll go ahead and do. All right, so we basically have talked about like the various tools that we've used so far, except for DBT. So questions about kind of like, these tools so far? Yeah. Okay. All right. So then, what's DBT? So when this data comes, if we're kind of like zoom in on Snowflake, when the data comes into Snowflake, we have like what's called like our source data, or like you can think of this like your raw data. And there's a variety of problems with our raw data, right? It's not clean. Oftentimes, we can have overlaps in the data. Like for instance, this may have some customer information, but then also HubSpot may have some customer information. And maybe we want to, ideally, we would like to merge this data so that if HubSpot has the guy's phone number and this thing has the person's location, we get one table that has, both, right? We also want to deduplicate it. So maybe this has some of the customers, but not all of them. And then this has some of the customers, but not all of them. So we need a way to, make sure we're getting, the set of both of these without duplicating it, right? If you have a Venn diagram, we want to get this and this, but we don't want duplicates, right? We don't want to capture Bob Smith twice. So like we need to deduplicate this stuff. We need to merge the data. We need to clean the data, right? And then we need to make sure, like if you think of all these different sources, we need to simplify it, right? That's where we talk about kind of like this OLAP structure with our star schema, right? To make this easier for something like a data analyst to work with, or business analyst, or, for a data scientist, maybe we help them clean the data, something like that. So this is the work that needs to be done, okay? And that's, it can be done in different tools like Python, but what has become popular is to try to do this in a tool like called DBT, where you're just writing SQL. You're writing SQL transformations. All right. So that's kind of what you do is you start off with this messy data from a variety of sources that some data is in one place, some data is in the other place. We have duplicate data, right? And we need to combine that data and then ultimately organize it in a way such that we're back to like our OLAP form, right? Or what we call like our MART tables, okay? And the way that we'll do that is by writing SQL queries. So that essentially is, what this tool is for. If you think that this was extract and load, basically find a way to get the data into the database, DBT is in charge of the T step, which is, the T is for transform, right? So the idea is that the transformations happen in Snowflake, all right? They happen, you load in the raw data in Snowflake, and then you just keep transforming the data by creating new tables. So, we'll see this as we go along, but again, it's kind of a different pattern than you probably have heard of a lot. We've talked about ETL, where we transform and then load the data into our database. Here, you load the data and then transform it. Let's talk about why you would kind of, one versus the other, because the preference has been now to do, if you think about ETL versus ELT, the preference is now on the ELT side, I'd say. All right. In other words, load in the raw data. ELT is load in raw data to, your analytics database, and then transform. So why is this the preference? One, the transformations, let's just start from here. One is, well, the raw data is in your analytics database, meaning that we can always just go query the raw data. You know, like if there's ever an issue, if we ever find out, hey, like we need, we forgot to pull some data, that this data is interesting to us, we want to add this to, say, one of the MART tables down the line, great. The raw data is already in the database. It's easy to access at that point, right? Or relatively easy to access, as opposed to, say, like storing the data in S3, and then all of a sudden we have to like worry about taking the data from S3, loading it to our analytics database. So just having it there makes it easier to access. You can imagine, like, there are lots of people that just know SQL in the organization. So, and they don't really know much about S3 or AWS services. So again, just having that data for them in particular in the database makes things easier. Two is, like, if we think about like maybe making our transformations with Python or other tools, like a lot of people don't know Python in an organization, but they do know SQL. So you get a benefit of, just using SQL means like it's more, I don't know if the word is like democratic, but more available, more accessible, I should say, in a way. Accessible to more users, internal users. All right, because now all of a sudden, like, business analysts can kind of query it, right, and things like that, and they can also see the transformations, like the pipeline is in one tool, is more consolidated. All right, everything, you have the raw data, and that raw data is is then transformed, with SQL, with this one tool, dbt. We don't have to kind of look around to see how the sausage was made, like how everything was made, right? We can just see everything in this one code base, and that makes things useful. And that was like a big reason for dbt as well. It's just like organizes things. Again, we'll like see this as we go through, but the fact that, like, okay, we start with the raw data, we transform the data, we have to worry about like deduping stuff and merging data, and then ultimately we get here and we can follow those transformations through one code base. That is useful, right? Because anyone then can, as long as they have access to that code base, they can read through, ideally understand those transformations and see how how this final form occurred. All right, so this is kind of the case for ELT, where you just load in the raw data and then you perform those transformations in the analytics database. Questions about this? That is like a typical type of question, right? Like people ask about, ETL versus ELT. Why is ELT useful, right? Like, I like the fact that like the raw data is directly in the database. The fact that like I said, it's easier for other members of the organization to work with the data if you're just using SQL, and you get to see the whole pipeline through this one in your analytics database and through this one repository, right? As opposed to spread out over different tools. Okay, so let's sign up for dbt. I'll show you how to do this. This may, like I said, it may take some struggle. The first thing is that your free trial of Snowflake likely has expired, meaning that hopefully you have another email address. If you don't, we can probably somehow get you one. So you'll probably need to sign up for Snowflake again. I'm sorry. And then here's what you can do. And this, I have a reading that walks you through this. The easiest way, in theory, to sign up for dbt is you go to your Snowflake account, you click on admin, and then from there you click on Partner Connect. This Partner Connect thing, you search for dbt, and you click on this. You can see mine is already connected. And this is kind of interesting. What it's doing here So it's saying, here it's saying it already did this, but what it does is it will create a new database in Snowflake, create a new warehouse, right? Remember, warehouse is the compute, right? This is like the allocated compute in Snowflake that will perform the queries. This is the user, and this is the role. I guess the role is like the permissions. Okay. And then you can click. So anyway, it is creating these users. Essentially, it's creating like a DBT login, right? And resources. Like this is everything. This is the dedicated DBT components, and we're going to create like a login for DBT to query the database. Then we can click launch. This then takes you to this sign in. I think it will look a little bit differently if you haven't done this yet. But then you sign in. Shoot, I hope. Okay, beautiful. Not so beautiful. Let me actually go to the reading anyway, because mine is going to be different. All right. So you can see I wrote out 3 different readings in case this doesn't work. All right, so then you click on this step. You can see this is what it connects. Okay, this is kind of valuable too. When you first sign up, like when you're first signing up, it's asking you what databases do you want to give DBT access to. So here they do raw and analytics. This is like DBT's tutorial. You can just do this Snowflake. If you look at your data, you have access to this Snowflake database, all right? And this has some sample data for you, I think. Maybe not account usage. Oh, is it this? It's Snowflake sample data. So Snowflake sample data, all right? This is like the sample data that you'll get access to. And this comes with your Snowflake account. So when you kind of do this, you want to select that database that you want to give DBT access to. If you don't do this correctly, this part I believe we can fix. We can just afterwards grant the correct usage, grant access to that database. So that's okay. Then from there, you'll click this activate button. Here you can see it will like fill out, I believe, your email address, or you'll do that. And then you'll log in. Maybe I can do that. And it will give you, it will kind of have created this Partner Connect trial account for you in DBT. So right now we are in DBT. And here, this will have already been filled out for you. But you can see that DBT, you'll have this new DBT account, and it will specify the settings for access to your Snowflake account. So this thing, this US East 1 TKB 62401, these are the components of my Snowflake account name. So you can see this matches, right, the URL up here. TKB624 matches this. .US East 1 is the region, the AWS region. And then from there you develop. Let me see if I can log into DBT. Oh man. Okay, beautiful. All right, so you can see I have this Jigsaw Labs. This is okay. You see this? So it created this Partner Connect like account for me, and then from there, if I click, is it like account settings? Hold on. It's under profile settings. Partner Connect trial. Yeah, you see that? So I click this thing here, this little gear thing. Then I clicked account settings. And then I thought that's what I did. Was it profile settings? Yeah, it was profile settings, sorry. So I click this little gear, then I click profile settings, and then if I scroll down, it takes me to Partner Connect trial. At this point, you can see the details of essentially the DBT connection to Snowflake. You don't need to change any of this, but you know, if one day you did, you can see where this whole thing occurs, where this connection is set up. At this point, you should be able to click develop. And essentially, DBT should have the permission to query in your Snowflake account. All right. So, you can see I already have this. I think you will have to, and the reading will take you through how to create this repository. You basically just click on a single button. And now this is connected to your Snowflake account. So let's take a look at this. So for example, if we go to databases, and then we go to my Snowflake sample data. Actually, let's click on worksheets. So make it a little easier. Let's create a new worksheet. Okay, so here we see our different databases. Here we have this Snowflake sample data thing. And then here's a table. And then let's place this name in SQL in the editor. Say like select all from limit 3. Let's run this. Okay, so we just selected from this database, this schema, this table, right? And did a limit 3. Now if I go over here, I don't believe you want the semicolon. What you do need to do, this is very frustrating. I don't think it's been changed. If you do not save this file, and it's not very clear about whether or not you have, and you click preview, you won't see anything. Let's see if I'm lying. I'm lying. Okay, they fixed that issue. So apparently saving maybe is not as big a deal as it used to be, but I don't totally trust it. Anyway, what you can see is that now we have successfully queried our data, right? This is from my Snowflake database, right? This is from my Snowflake sample database. So this is good, all right? Eventually, we are going to want, and all we did, by the way, to do this was we just simply went to Snowflake, went to admin, clicked on Partner Connect, search for DBT, clicked on this, and then selected that database and click launch, and then filled out the form to sign up for DBT. That's really all we did. Then from there, we clicked develop, and we wrote this query, and then we click preview to confirm that we are able to access our Snowflake database. Eventually, we are also going to want to use more data than just what's in this public database. So to do that, I created this Northwinds. This is the data set we're going to want to use. All right. And I created this kind of reading so you can see what we need to do. The main thing, there's two different parts here. One is we need to run this SQL script, right? So that we can actually, this will create the setup for create all the tables, insert all the data for this Northwinds database. All right, so you can just probably copy all of this and paste this. The reading tells you how to do this into a worksheet, right? And do this. When you do this, though, you just want to make sure, you probably want to create, I would create a database first, and I tell you what to name it and things like that. The other thing you need to do, though, and this is a little trickier, is that you also need to grant access of this database to the DBT user. So that's what's happening here, right? We can see we're creating the database, Fivetran database. We're creating the schema, Postgres, Northwinds, RDS public. And now we're saying, okay, we're about to use this database, and we're about to use this schema. Now, I want you to grant usage on the database, on this database, to PCDBT role, right? This is the guy who is accessing this is the DBT user that is accessing Snowflake, right? Is this PC DBT role. So that's what we're doing over here. And then we're also create schema, allow this role to create a schema, allow this role to like query the tables, all this stuff. So you want to copy this as well. If you want to, right, and just copy this into Snowflake, all right, in the worksheet. Again, the reading tells you what to do, but essentially you'll just copy that query over first, run it by pressing, highlight all this, press play. And then when that's done, you can copy the other query. This is now going to load in all the data. All right. So that's the second thing. If you want to make sure that, hey, like this guy, this DBT role actually has access, right? What you can do is you can switch to that role, PC DBT role, and try to access the database, right? Like before we go over to DBT, to make sure that, hey, like, this user at least has these permissions, we can do like select all and let's say place name and editor from Fivetran limit 3. And then run this. And again, I'm running this as my DB2 role, just to confirm that, hey, like this user, I did properly give this user access. Because lots of times if DBT is breaking, if it's not able to view the database, it's because we did not give this role access to it. All right, so at least for me, it's easier to debug this from Snowflake than it is from DBT. Got it? All right, cool. So what I will deploy is this intro to DBT. That's kind of the, not everything. I think this is going to deploy everything. Actually, I think I will deploy everything. So it's intro to DBT, setting up, right, which is like that partner connect thing, loading the data, right, this Northwinds data, and then you can see there's this workflow reading, which if you want to move through that, that's fine with me, right, and then practice with the workflow. So this is basically like setting up and then get familiar with the DBT interface. Questions on basically anything I've been talking about before I move you into breakout rooms?